I stood in the doorway of our guest room, frozen. My husband Mark was tangled in sheets with Talia, my best friend since high school. Their clothes were scattered across the floor like evidence at a crime scene. For 3 seconds nobody moved. Then Talia's eyes met mine, wide with panic. Mark's face drained of color. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't slam the door or throw anything. I just stood there, watching them scramble to cover themselves, watching their mouths open and close like fish gasping for air. Mark stammered something, some pathetic excuse that dissolved into nothing. Talia started crying immediately, pulling the sheet up to her chin like it could protect her from what she'd done. I felt my hands shaking, felt my chest tightening, felt the floor tilting under me. But I kept my face still, kept my voice steady. I looked at Mark, then at Talia, and said one word. Move. They stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. Move, I repeated. Get out of my house. Now. My voice was calm, almost polite. That scared them more than any screaming would have. I walked downstairs while they scrambled to get dressed. My legs felt weak, like they might give out any second. I made it to the front porch before my knees buckled. I sat on the steps, staring at nothing, forcing myself to breathe. In and out. Slow and steady. I heard them moving around upstairs, frantic whispers, footsteps. Part of me wanted to collapse right there, to sob until I couldn't breathe. But something else took over, something colder and sharper. I wiped my face even though there were no tears yet. I straightened my back and waited. Mark came down first, half-dressed, face red. He reached for me, tried to touch my shoulder. I stood up and stepped back. Don't. He froze. Talia appeared behind him, mascara smeared, clothes wrinkled. She tried to speak, but I held up my hand. Leave. They looked at each other, then at me, and finally walked to Talia's car. I watched them drive away in silence. The quiet was louder than any argument. That silence would haunt them for a long time. I made sure of it. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. My hands were still shaking, but my mind was clear, sharper than it had been in months. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and sat down at the table. That's when I finally let myself think the words. My husband cheated with my best friend. But they had no idea what they'd just started. My name is Elise Warren. I'm 34 years old, and until that moment, I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was Mark's wife. Talia's loyal friend. The woman who kept everything together, who forgave easily, who always gave second chances. But sitting there in my kitchen, something shifted. I wasn't that woman anymore. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to beg or plead or ask them why. I was going to do something else entirely. I was going to take back everything they'd stolen from me, piece by piece, until they understood exactly what they'd lost. Mark and I had been married for 8 years. We met in college, got engaged after graduation, and built what I thought was a solid life together. It wasn't perfect. We argued sometimes about money or his late nights at work or my tendency to overthink everything. But I believed in us. I believed in loyalty, in commitment, in the promise we made to each other. Mark was steady, predictable. He worked in sales at a pharmaceutical company, traveled occasionally for conferences, complained about his boss but never quit. I worked as a coordinator at a non-profit downtown, managing events and donor relationships. We owned a small house in the suburbs with a mortgage we split evenly. We talked about having kids someday, about saving for a bigger place, about retiring early and traveling. It all seemed so normal, so safe. I thought we were building something together. I thought we were on the same team. But somewhere along the way, the foundation cracked and I didn't see it until it was too late. Talia had been my best friend for 16 years. We met in high school during a group project and bonded over terrible cafeteria pizza and shared frustration with our chemistry teacher. She was bold where I was cautious, loud where I was quiet. We balanced each other out. After high school we stayed close. She was my maid of honor at my wedding. I helped her move into 3 different apartments. We spent Friday nights eating takeout and watching bad reality shows. She knew everything about me, every fear, every dream, every stupid decision I'd ever made. I trusted her completely. I never questioned her presence in my life or in my marriage. When she and Mark became friends, I was happy about it. I thought it meant we were all family. I never imagined that trust could be used as a weapon. I never imagined she'd take everything I gave her and use it to destroy me. But she did. And now I had to decide what to do about it. The first red flag happened 3 months before I caught them. It was a Thursday night, late spring. I'd been out running errands and came home earlier than expected. Mark and Talia were sitting in the living room, talking quietly. The second I walked in, they stopped. The silence was instant, unnatural. Talia's smile was too bright, too fast. Mark's voice cracked when he said hello. I asked what they were talking about, and Talia said something about work stress. Mark nodded too enthusiastically. I set my bags down and joined them, but the conversation felt forced, like they were performing for me. I brushed it off. Told myself I was imagining things. But that moment stuck with me. It was the first time I felt like an outsider in my own home. The first time I wondered if something was happening that I couldn't see. I should have listened to that instinct. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I let it go, let them convince me everything was fine. Our 9th anniversary was in June. I'd planned a quiet dinner at home, nothing fancy. I cooked Mark's favorite meal, set the table with candles, even bought a bottle of wine we'd been saving. Then Talia showed up. She knocked on the door just as we were sitting down to eat, holding a bottle of champagne and wearing a dress that seemed too nice for a casual visit. She said she wanted to stop by and congratulate us, that she wouldn't stay long. Mark insisted she join us for dessert. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I smiled and said okay. We sat at that table, the 3 of us, and I felt like a guest at my own anniversary dinner. Mark and Talia talked and laughed while I picked at my food. He poured her wine. She touched his arm when she laughed. I watched them, watched the way they leaned toward each other, watched the way he smiled at her. That night, Mark didn't kiss me goodnight. He said he was tired and went straight to bed. I stayed downstairs, staring at the candles burning down to nothing. Mark started lying about work. He'd tell me he had late meetings, client dinners, projects that required extra hours. I believed him at first. But then I called his office one night to ask if he wanted me to save him dinner. His assistant said he'd left hours ago. I hung up confused. When Mark came home, I asked where he'd been. He said a meeting ran long. I didn't push it. But I started paying attention. The next time he said he was working late, I checked our shared credit card statement. No charges near his office. No dinner receipts. Nothing that matched his story. Then Talia texted me one night, some casual message about being swamped with her own work. 30 minutes later, Mark told me he was meeting a colleague for drinks. The timelines didn't add up. They were syncing their stories, covering for each other. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Instead, I started documenting everything. Dates, times, lies. I kept a notebook hidden in my desk drawer and wrote it all down. I saw the messages by accident. Mark left his phone on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. It lit up with a text from Talia. I glanced at it, not meaning to invade his privacy, just a reflex. But what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't explicit. Just flirty. Little inside jokes, emojis that felt too intimate, messages sent late at night when he was supposedly asleep next to me. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling, and scrolled back. Weeks of messages. Compliments, plans to meet up, references to things they'd done without me. My stomach twisted. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, wanted to scream, wanted to confront him right then. But I didn't. I took screenshots instead. Every message, every thread, every piece of evidence. I sent them to my own email, deleted the sent messages, and put his phone back exactly where he'd left it. When Mark came downstairs, I smiled and asked if he wanted coffee. He said yes, kissed my forehead, and went on with his day like nothing was wrong. I asked Mark to go to couples therapy. It was a week after I saw the messages. I told him I felt disconnected, that I wanted us to work on our communication. He looked at me like I'd suggested something absurd. "We don't need therapy," he said. "We're fine." But we weren't fine. I knew it. He knew it. He just didn't want to admit it. I pushed gently, said it might help us get closer again. He shut me down, said he was too busy, that therapy was for people with real problems. I called Talia later that day, needing someone to talk to, needing reassurance. She told me I was overthinking things, that all marriages went through rough patches. She said Mark loved me, that I just needed to relax. Her voice was too calm, too rehearsed, like she'd practiced what to say. That's when I realized what they were doing. They weren't just lying to me. They were manipulating me, making me doubt my own instincts, gaslighting me into believing I was the problem. I hung up and made a decision. I was done being emotional. I was done hoping they'd come clean. I was going to detach completely and start planning my exit. I confided in no one. Not my sister, not my coworkers, not even my mother. I couldn't risk anyone talking me out of what I was about to do. I needed to stay focused, stay sharp. I started making copies of everything. Financial records, mortgage documents, tax returns, bank statements. I scanned them all and saved them to a cloud account Mark didn't have access to. I opened a separate checking account at a different bank, one he knew nothing about. I started transferring small amounts of money into it every week, just enough that he wouldn't notice. I documented every expense he made, every charge on our credit cards, every withdrawal from our joint account. I was building a case, piece by piece, brick by brick. I wasn't planning to just leave him. I was planning to leave him with nothing to stand on. The whole time I acted normal. I smiled when he came home. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. He had no idea what was coming. The day before I caught them, I knew something was going to happen. My niece's birthday party was that weekend, and I'd asked Mark to help me decorate the house. He said he was too tired, that he'd had a long week and just needed to rest. I told him it was fine, that I'd handle it myself. But later that afternoon, I saw Talia's car parked 2 blocks from our house. I was driving home from the store when I spotted it, pulled over near the park. My heart started pounding. I circled the block and saw it again, same spot. I drove home slowly, parked in the driveway, and sat there for a minute. Mark's car was in the garage. The house looked quiet, normal. But I knew. Deep down I knew what was happening inside. I grabbed my grocery bags and walked to the front door. I didn't rush. I didn't hesitate. I just opened the door, set the bags on the counter, and listened. Silence upstairs. A step. Muffled voice. I walked up the stairs, one step at a time, knowing exactly what I'd find. After I told them to leave, after they drove away in Talia's car, I stood in my house and felt the weight of everything settle over me. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I went back upstairs to the guest room and stripped the bed. I threw the sheets in the washing machine, bleach and hot water, and watched them spin through the glass door. I cleaned the room top to bottom, vacuumed the floor, wiped down the furniture, opened the windows to let out the stale air. I erased every trace of what had happened there. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and called my sister. I didn't tell her what happened. I just asked if I could stay with her for a few days. She said yes without asking questions. I packed a bag, locked the house, and left. Mark called me 17 times that night. I didn't answer once. Talia sent me texts begging me to let her explain. I deleted them without reading past the first line. I was done listening to their lies. Now they were going to listen to me. I stayed at my sister's house for 4 days. She didn't push me to talk, just gave me space and made sure I ate. On the 5th day I went back home. Mark was there waiting. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes were red, his clothes wrinkled. He tried to hug me. I stepped back. "We need to talk," he said. "No," I replied. "You need to leave." He stared at me. "What?" "I want you to stay with your brother for a while," I said calmly. "I need space to think." He started to argue, but something in my face stopped him. He packed a bag and left that same day. Talia texted me again, asking if we could meet, if we could talk this through like adults. I didn't respond. Instead, I went through Mark's office at home, looking through files, old bills, anything I might have missed. That's when I found it. Bank transfer records. Thousands of dollars moved from our joint account into an account I didn't recognize. I looked closer. The account belonged to a business called Elevate Consulting. Talia's business. He'd been funding her failing company with our money. My money. I sat back in his chair and smiled for the first time in days. Mark had been secretly supporting Talia's business for over a year. Small transfers at first, 500 here, 1,000 there. Then bigger amounts, 3,000, 5,000. All from our joint savings account, the one we were supposed to use for emergencies or a down payment on a bigger house. I added up the total. Nearly $30,000. Spent on her dreams while he told me we couldn't afford a vacation. I printed every statement, every transfer record, every receipt I could find. I organized them into a folder, labeled and dated. This wasn't just infidelity anymore. This was financial betrayal. This was theft. I took the folder and drove to a law office downtown. I'd researched attorneys online, found one who specialized in divorce and asset protection. Her name was Catherine Cole, and her reviews said she was sharp, aggressive, and fair. I walked into her office and laid the folder on her desk. "I need help," I said. She looked through the documents, her expression never changing. When she finished, she looked up at me. "You've done your homework," she said. "Good. This gives us leverage." Catherine explained everything clearly. Because Mark used marital funds without my knowledge or consent, I had grounds for a strong case. The affair itself mattered, but the financial deception mattered more. In our state, misuse of joint assets during marriage could impact the final settlement significantly. She asked if I had more documentation. I showed her my notebook, the screenshots, the timeline of lies. She nodded approvingly. "You've been smart about this," she said. "Most people react emotionally. You documented everything." I told her I wanted to be fair but firm. I didn't want to destroy Mark, but I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed either. Catherine laid out a strategy. We'd file for divorce citing both infidelity and financial misconduct. We'd request full financial disclosure from Mark. We'd freeze joint accounts to prevent further transfers. And we'd stay quiet until everything was in place. "Don't warn him," Catherine said. "Don't give him time to hide anything or prepare a defense. Let his arrogance hang him." Agreed. I left her office feeling lighter than I had in months. Catherine's strategy was simple but effective. First, document everything. I'd already done that. Second, stay composed. No dramatic confrontations, no emotional outbursts. Nothing that could be used against me later. Third, don't warn them. Let Mark and Talia think I was still processing, still deciding what to do. The longer they believed they had time, the more careless they'd become. Fourth, let their arrogance hang them. People who cheat often think they're smarter than everyone else. They get comfortable. They make mistakes. I just had to wait for those mistakes to pile up. Catherine filed a motion to freeze our joint accounts, citing suspected financial misconduct. The bank would notify Mark within 48 hours. By then, it would be too late for him to move anything else. I went home and waited. I cleaned the house, went to work, lived my life like nothing had changed. Mark called me every day, asking when we could talk, when I'd be ready to discuss things. I told him I needed more time. He sounded relieved, like he thought time was on his side. He had no idea how wrong he was. 2 weeks after I caught them, Mark texted me asking if we could have dinner. He said he wanted to explain to help me understand. I agreed. We met at a neutral restaurant, nothing fancy, just a quiet place where we could talk. He showed up wearing cologne and a clean shirt, like this was a date instead of a disaster. He smiled when he saw me. I didn't smile back. We ordered food and he started talking. He said it was a mistake, that he never meant to hurt me, that Talia had been going through a rough time and he was just trying to help her. He said it only happened a few times, that it didn't mean anything. Every word was a lie. I knew it. He knew it. But I let him talk. I let him dig his own grave with every excuse, every contradiction. At one point, he said they'd only been involved for a month. Earlier he'd said it started recently. The timelines didn't match. I pointed that out calmly. He stumbled, tried to correct himself, made it worse. I recorded the whole conversation on my phone, audio only legally. When dinner ended, he reached across the table for my hand. Pulled away. "I'll think about it," I said. He looked hopeful. Felt nothing. Mark started acting confident again. He stopped calling every day, stopped sending desperate texts. I think he believed I was coming around, that I'd forgive him eventually. Talia started posting on social media again. Carefully curated photos of her at work, at coffee shops, living her normal life. She didn't mention me or Mark, just acted like nothing had happened. But I was different now. I'd lost weight without trying, not from stress but from clarity. I slept better, smiled more. People at work noticed. My boss asked if I'd done something different with my hair. I hadn't. I just stopped carrying their weight. Meanwhile, Catherine was building the case. She requested Mark's financial records, employment history, credit card statements. She found more transfers to Talia's account, more lies about where our money had gone. The trap was almost finished. I just needed one more piece. And Mark, predictable as always, was about to hand it to me. Mark called me 3 weeks after our dinner. He sounded excited, hopeful. He said he'd been thinking about our future, about how we could rebuild. He wanted to refinance the house, use the equity to pay off some debts and start fresh. Sounded reasonable, almost generous. But I knew better. I asked which debts. He hesitated, then said credit cards, some old loans. I asked for specifics. He got vague, said we could go over the details later. I told him I needed to think about it. After we hung up, I called Catherine. She made some calls, pulled some records. 2 days later, she called me back. "Talia's business is drowning," she said. "She owes suppliers, contractors, and the bank. She's about to default on a loan. Mark's trying to refinance your house to cover her debt." My jaw tightened. "Can we prove that?" "If he goes through with it, yes. He'll have to disclose where the money's going." Smiled. "Let him try." Catherine filed for divorce the next day. Mark was served papers at work. By the time he called me, panicked and angry, I was already 3 steps ahead. I arranged a meeting at my sister's house. Neutral ground, witnesses nearby. I invited Mark and Talia both. They showed up separately, confused about why the other was there. When they walked into the living room and saw each other, the panic was instant. They looked at me, then at each other, then back at me. I didn't say anything. I just slid a folder across the coffee table. Mark opened it first. Inside were the bank records, the transfer history, the screenshots of their messages, the timeline of lies. Everything. Talia looked over his shoulder and went pale. Mark's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "Does it matter?" I replied. Talia started crying, same as before, trying to play the victim. "Elise, please let me explain." "No," I said calmly. "You're done explaining. You're done lying. You're done pretending." Mark tried to argue, said I was taking things out of context, that it wasn't what it looked like. I pointed to a specific page. "This is $30,000 you stole from our account to fund her failing business. What context makes that okay?" He had no answer. Neither did she. They just sat there, caught, exposed, powerless. I left the meeting without saying another word. Catherine handled the rest. She filed for divorce with full documentation of Mark's financial misconduct and infidelity. The court froze all our joint assets pending investigation. Mark couldn't touch the house, the savings, anything. He called me 12 times that night. I didn't answer. Talia sent me a long email, pages of apologies and excuses and explanations I didn't read. I deleted it. Catherine told me the process would take a few months, but the outcome was nearly certain. Mark would lose the house. I'd keep the majority of our shared assets. He'd have to repay what he'd stolen, or it would be deducted from his share. Talia's business would collapse without his money propping it up. She'd probably file for bankruptcy. And I'd walk away clean, whole, free. I signed the papers without hesitation. Mark finally realized what he'd lost. Not just me, but everything we'd built. He'd traded a stable life for a lie, and now he was paying the price. Talia realized something too. Mark had never planned to leave me. He just used her. They both lost. I didn't. The divorce finalized in 4 months. Mark lost the house. He had to buy me out of my share, which he couldn't afford, so the court ordered it sold. I walked away with more than half the proceeds plus compensation for the money he'd stolen. He ended up in a small apartment across town, barely scraping by. Talia's business collapsed completely. Without Mark's financial support, she couldn't keep up with expenses. She laid off her only 2 employees and shut the doors permanently. She filed for bankruptcy 3 months later. The worst part for them wasn't the money. It was each other. Mark blamed Talia for ruining his marriage. Talia blamed Mark for making promises he couldn't keep. They turned on each other viciously, and the friendship they'd built on betrayal crumbled just as fast. Meanwhile, I moved into a quiet apartment near downtown. Clean, simple mine. I got a promotion at work, a position I'd turned down years ago to support Mark's career. Now it was mine alone. I started running in the mornings. I reconnected with old friends. I learned to be alone without being lonely. Mark's family reached out to apologize. They'd heard the truth and wanted me to know they didn't support what he'd done. I thanked them but kept my distance. I didn't need their approval. I just needed peace. 6 months after the divorce, my boss offered me a major opportunity. A new position had opened up in our Portland office, a chance to lead a regional program I'd helped develop. It meant relocation, a significant raise, and a fresh start somewhere new. Years ago, I'd turned down a similar offer because Mark didn't want to leave Minneapolis. His job, his friends, his life were all here. I'd made myself smaller to fit into his plans. Now nobody was stopping me. I accepted the position immediately. I gave notice on my apartment, started packing, made plans to move within the month. Mark found out through mutual acquaintances. He called me sounding broken. "You're really leaving?" he asked. "Yes. I never wanted this," he said. "You did this," I replied. "You just didn't think there'd be consequences." Hung up. Talia sent me a final message before I left. "I hope you find happiness." I didn't respond. She didn't deserve my closure. I finished packing, loaded my car, and left Minneapolis on a clear Sunday morning. I didn't look back. I stood in my new apartment in Portland, sunlight pouring through the windows, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not the fragile kind that shatters at the first sign of trouble, but the solid kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you deserve. Mark and Talia faded into the background of my life, consequences of their own arrogance playing out far away from me. I didn't follow their stories anymore. I didn't need to. I'd already won by choosing myself. I whispered to the empty room, not bitter, not angry, just certain. I was never the one who lost. I was the one who survived. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who trusted too easily, who forgave too quickly, who made herself small to keep the peace. She was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, sharper, unshakable. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. This wasn't pettiness. This was self-worth. And as I unpacked boxes in my new home, starting a life built entirely on my own terms, I realized something important. Sometimes the worst betrayal becomes the beginning of the life you deserved all along.